just 5%, he's looking at cutting it. He said he's going to cut it to less than 15%. There's a very influential group in the UK called the Taxpayers Alliance, and actually they're calling for a move to 10%. As we all know, foreign direct investment is critically important to the economy here in Wicklow, to the economy in the Republic. One of the main pillars of that, yes, we've got well-educated people, and yes, we're a nice place to live and all of that, but as we all know, one of the main pillars is the 12.5% corporation tax. Now, it's actually been under threat from the UK for quite some time. Back in the 80s, they were above 50%. But then about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they brought it down to 30%. And then in 2009, so what's that, about 7 years ago, they started bringing it down year by year. And in 2008, they were at 30%. And by last year, they brought it down to 20%. So that's a very, very serious reduction in UK corporation tax. So they're at 20% now versus our 12.5%. And Osborne is saying now that they'll bring it down by more than 5%. So they'll go down below 15%. And of course, there's people calling for it to go to 10%. And it's actually worse than that as well, because if you broaden it past corporation tax, Declan, they have really, really attractive tax incentives for investors and for startups. So their capital gains tax is significantly lower than ours. They also have a program whereby investors can recoup a huge amount of the money they've invested in a company. If the company fails, they can write off, I think, up to about 80% of the losses against future taxes. So clearly, Britain under the Tories are going. They want to be one of the most competitive countries out there on tax. Now, personally, I think it's a race to the bottom. I don't think it's a healthy thing. I think ultimately everybody loses because everybody tries to become more and more competitive for the same, everyone's trying to get a bigger slice of the same pie. And ultimately you get to a situation where the corporates, they're not paying what should be a reasonable contribution to society. But in the short term for Ireland, yes, this is a real problem.
Now, the UK will be outside the euro. If we take the scenario going, whether they leave or not is still open for debate there. But they will be outside. So what's that's going to mean if they're actually outside the EU and they have this low corporation tax? There'll be so much barriers to get into the EU that it might not be worth it.
Yeah, it's hard to say. Clearly, the Osborne's announcement is a reaction to Brexit because corporation tax, income tax, all taxes are within the competence, within the EU, they're within the competence of each sovereign state. Therefore, obviously, we're allowed to have a 12.5% corporation tax, even though it drives the French and the Germans absolutely bonkers. There's nothing they can do about it because within the rules of the European Union, it is a competence of the state. So the UK could have moved their corporation tax to 15% or lower anytime they wanted. And as I've just talked through, they actually did move it from 30% down to 20% over the last few years. So why now do this big jump to less than 15%? They're clearly worried. Osborne is clearly worried. I would imagine, Declan, what's happening is their people are beginning to talk to the large international corporates who are saying, you know what, we were thinking about coming to London, we were thinking about coming to Manchester, but we must have a footprint within the EU.
Okay, so he's trying to prevent them moving. So do you see it that if they do reverse it, and a lot of people are talking about, including Tony Blair, that they'll have a referendum on something else, like the terms or something, and the British people reject the terms and they will remain in the EU, that he'll reverse that and put it back up?
It's a great question. I just don't know. My sense of Tory politics is that they believe in a very low tax economy. Thatcher obviously pushed a lot of that, but ultimately, Declan, it sort of destroys itself. I mean, if you look at Brexit and the reasons for Brexit, sure, there was a lot around immigration, but the catchphrase for the Leave campaign was take back control. Take back control, because people are feeling disempowered. Why are people feeling disempowered? Because of growing inequality, because you don't have the investment in public services you need. Why not? Because you're slashing your taxes. So they can continue on this path and they can try to attract in the corporates. But if they keep reducing their taxes, they're actually feeding a version of globalization which caused them to leave in the first place. So to your question then, if they're given a chance to go back into the EU or to reject leaving the EU, really the only way I see that happening is if you give people a reason to be part of the EU, to be part of a globalized world. And actually, slashing your corporation taxes, I would argue, will disempower people more, because the less taxes that get collected by the state, the less they can invest in the NHS, the less they can invest in education, and so the bigger the gap you get between those of privilege and the rest of the country. So, short term, sure, if Osborne feels he needs to, keep the UK very attractive for multinationals to stay or multinationals to come, okay, it's a sensible thing to do. It's very bad news for Ireland. Very bad news for Ireland. But in the medium to longer term, I think what he'll actually end up doing is they're driving a socio-economic model that drives inequality, that leads to people being disempowered, and that leads to the kind of populist, ugly rhetoric that we all saw as part of the Leave campaign.
Okay, well, just one question on this, and then I've got some news for you in case you haven't heard. But on this, should Ireland be less friendly towards the UK? Because we are doing we want to help them as much as we can because of the trade we do and because of the land border, etc. If they're going to be so aggressive on this, don't we have to defend ourselves?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. I think it should be made very clear to London that that Ireland is not amused at all. Like, the UK needs allies going into the negotiations with the EU. They've clearly annoyed the bigger EU countries, and we've seen some very hostile language on the first few days after Brexit, talking about it not being an amicable divorce, about there being no pain-free way for the separation of the UK from the European Union. The UK needs allies, and we should be an ally of the UK. We certainly have history, but now we are close culturally, we are close socially, we are close economically. Obviously, we have a shared border, and I and many others would like to see an integration to a 32-county republic. So we have a special relationship with the United Kingdom. I calculate that about 8,000 people born in Wicklow, Declan, are now living in the UK. There's thousands of UK-born people living in Wicklow. We have a very close relationship. We have a special relationship. However, one of Ireland's core competitive advantages is the 12.5% corporation tax. In the UK doing what they are doing, they are directly threatening our ability to maintain and attract foreign direct investment. And they should be left in no uncertain terms that is not a helpful act at a time when we should be working very closely with the UK to make sure that their exit from the EU is as painless as possible.
Okay, just one last thing. Thanks for that, Stephen Donnelly. But the UKIP leader, Nigel Farage, has decided to stand down. He says he wants his life back. Wow, okay.
Well, I won't spill too many tears over that. I mean, I don't know if you saw it. I don't know if the people listening now saw it. It's all over Facebook, the speech that Nigel Farage gave in the European Parliament the few days after Brexit.
You're not laughing now.
You're not laughing now. And I mean, at a human level, you can understand. He dedicated many years of his life to this. He was laughed at, and actually he and a bunch of others succeeded in taking the UK out of the EU. So you can kind of understand it at a human level, but not at a political level. His speech really irritated MEPs. I think was it Jean-Claude Juncker his response was, why don't you just leave? What are you doing here? Why are you in the European Parliament? Just get out. And the tone, I think the Belgian Prime Minister was interviewed that evening and was scathing of the UK. So Farage, my sense is the politics of it are such that the fact that he keeps stirring the pot in the EU is not helpful to the UK right now, and maybe his going will make it easier for the UK to get a better deal and have better negotiations with the European Union. Who knows?
Yeah, indeed. And of course Boris not challenged for the leadership, and Nigel gone. Goodness me, it's a whole change over there. But those people on the Leave side, well, they're disappearing. Thanks very much indeed, Stephen. Good to talk to you. Take care. That is Stephen Donnelly there from the Social Democrats. So Nigel Farage is